In this demonstration, we create the friend repository and we ensure that we use a single friend repository per detail view. Here I've opened the friend organizer solution. In the UI project, we have a data folder that contains our data services. Now I want to split these data services into lookups and into repositories. So I create here two subfolders. One subfolder called lookups and another subfolder that I call repositories. I move the iFriend lookup data service interface and the lookup data service class into the lookups folder. I move the friend data service and the iFriend data service interface into the repositories folder. Now let's open up the friend data service. I select the class and I press Ctrl RR. Now I can rename the class to friend repository. I press Ctrl dot to rename the file as well to friend repository. Now I go to the iFriend data service interface and I rename that interface as well to iFriend repository. I press Ctrl dot to rename the file as well. I also want to put the repositories into a repository subnamespace that is aligned with our folder structure. Also, the lookup data service should be in a lookups namespace. And the interface as well. Now with these renamings and namespace adjustments, we will get some build errors. I'm sure we will get some errors. Okay, type or namespace iFriend repository not found. Here we are in the friend detail view model. So I just select the iFriend repository and I press Ctrl dot to add a using directive for our new repositories namespace. I also rename the field here from data service to friend repository. I also rename this constructor parameter here from data service to friend repository. Now let's see what else we have in the error list. Here in the navigation view model, we are using the iFriend lookup data service. So we just need a using directive for the new lookups namespace. Now the error list is empty and we can try to rebuild the solution again. We get some more errors. Here in the Bootstrapper class, where we register the lookup data service and the friend repository, we also need to add the using directives for the new namespaces. So I press Ctrl dot to add the lookups namespace, and I press Ctrl dot on the friend repository to add the repositories namespace. Now we should be able to build the solution. Okay, rebuild all succeeded. Now we can do our real work, because so far we have just created folders and restructured our code a bit. Let's open up the friend repository, and here in this friend repository, we want to use now a single friend organizer DB context. This means in the constructor, we don't want to take a func. Instead of taking a func, we just take a friend organizer DB context instance. So we also rename the parameter from context creator to context. And we store that context just in a field that we call _context. I press Ctrl dot to generate that field. And of course, we can get rid of this content creator field that contained the func. Now let's go to the getById async method. Here we don't need the using block anymore. So I can remove it. Inside of the method, we can use here now our context that we have in the _context field. But now, of course, we don't want to call this asNoTracking method. We want our context to track the entities that it has loaded. So let's just remove this asNoTracking method call. Now the getById async method is complete. Let's continue with the saveAsync method. As we will use a single context in that friend repository, the context should know already about the loaded friend, because we will call getById async before we call the saveAsync method. That means we can get rid of this friend parameter here. Inside of the method, we don't need a using block as we have the context in a field. As the friend that we want to save is already tracked by the context because we have loaded it over the getById async method, we don't have to attach anything and we don't have to set any state. All we have to do is call the saveChangesAsync method on our DB context. I pressed Ctrl KD to format the code. Now our little friend repository class is already done. We have now a single friend organizer DB context instance in this repository. The next thing that we need to do is to adjust the iFriend repository interface. So let's just go to that interface. Here we have the save async method and we need to remove the friend parameter. I save this and now I try to rebuild the solution again. We get one error that is contained in the friend detail view model in the onSaveExecute method. Here we still pass the model to the save async method. So I remove this and now our code will build. The next thing we need to do is to ensure that we have a single friend repository per friend detail view. In the previous clip, we have created this friend repository that is using a single friend organizer DB context instance. Now when I right-click on this interface to find all the references, we can see that the interface is used in the friend detail view model. The friend detail view model gets an iFriend repository injected into the constructor, and it is using that friend repository to load a friend and to save a friend. So let's run the application and let's see if everything works. I select a friend and the details come up. So the navigation items on the left are loaded by the lookup data service, and the details here on the right are displayed by the friend detail view model, and so they are loaded by the friend repository. But now let's see what happens when we change my name here and when we navigate to another item. When I go back, I can still see the change of my name, but I expected that this friend will be reloaded from the database. But it's not reloaded because actually we are still using a single DB context behind the scenes. An Entity Framework DB context is caching entities, and so it's just reloading this Thomas Claudius Huber entity from the cache and not from the database. You can also see the fact that we are using a single DB context behind the scenes when you click the Save button on another screen. So here we have changed the first name to Thomas Claudius. Now let's navigate to another friend and let's hit the Save button here. Now let's restart the application. Now here you see that the first name has been changed to Thomas Claudius, but we have hit the Save button on the screen of another friend. This means we are using the same DB context across all the screens for the different friends. But we should use one DB context per screen that has a Save button. So we need to adjust this. But wait, let me think a bit. We have created a friend repository that has a single DB context. And the friend detail view model is using a single friend repository. So what's going on? We are using the same friend detail view model for all the different friends. Now we have to change this. We need to create a friend detail view model every time the user selects a friend in the application. Then the application will work as expected because each friend detail view model will have its own friend repository that will have its own DB context. So let's implement this. Here in the friend detail view models constructor, you can see that we subscribe to the open friend detail view event. When I scroll down to the onOpenFriendDetail view method that handles this event, you can see that it just calls the loadAsync method. But now instead of handling this openFriendDetail view event in the friend detail view model, we should handle it in the main view model. Handling this event in the main view model allows us to create a new friend detail view model instance for every openFriendDetail view event. So I just cut this block here where we subscribe to the event and I go to the main view model. In the main view models constructor, I paste the line where we subscribe to the openFriendDetail view event. This means I also need an iEventAggregator parameter on that main view model constructor. So let's add it here. Let's add a using for Prism events and let's call the parameter EventAggregator. And I just store it in a field underscore EventAggregator. Let's generate the field in the main view model. I click on the openFriendDetail view event and I press Ctrl- to add a using directive for Friend Organizer UI event. Now let's go back to the friend detail view model and let's scroll to the bottom and let's cut this onOpenFriendDetail view method that was handling the event. I go back to the main view model and I paste the method into my main view model. Now inside of this method, we want to create a new friend detail view model. Then we will have a friend detail view model per friend ID and so a friend repository per friend ID and also a DB context per friend ID. To create a friend detail view model in this method, we need to adjust the main view models constructor. Here we don't take a single iFriendDetailViewModel instance. Instead, we just take a func that we can use to create iFriendDetailViewModels. I press Ctrl- to add a using for system. I rename the parameter from FriendDetailViewModel to FriendDetailViewModelCreator. Let's adjust it here as well, and let's assign it to a field. Underscore FriendDetailViewModelCreator. I press Ctrl- to generate that field. Now let me just move the initialization of the navigation view model property to the bottom of the constructor, as I prefer to initialize the private members first. Now let's go down to our onOpenFriendDetailView method. Here we can create now a new FriendDetailView model by calling our new FriendDetailViewModelCreator func. We can assign the FriendDetailView model to the FriendDetailView model property of our main view model. Then in the next step, we can call the loadAsync method on the created FriendDetailView model. So here is something wrong. Property or indexer FriendDetailView model cannot be assigned to, it is read-only. Okay, this is true. Here we just have a getter on this auto property. Let's change this to a full-blown property. Without ReSharper, the simplest way is to remove this property and to recreate it by using the propfull snippet. So I remove it and I write here propfull, and I press the tab key twice. I want to have a property of type iFriendDetailViewModel, and the field should have the name FriendDetailViewModel, and the property itself should have the name FriendDetailViewModel. I cut the field here, and I move it to the top of the main ViewModel class. Now I go to the setter of the property, and I call the onPropertyChanged method of the ViewModel base class here to raise the property changed event. I also make the setter private because we only set this property from our onOpenFriendDetailView event handler, where we create a new FriendDetailView model. Now let's run the application again. I select a friend, and I change the first name, and I navigate to another friend, and I navigate back. And you see the change is lost. Now we have the expected behavior. We have one FriendDetailView model per friend. And this means now that we have a single DB context per detail view. So we can use this DB context now to enable and disable the save button. So the next thing that we do is to add an hasChanges method to our friend repository that we can use in the FriendDetailView model. In this demonstration, we will add an hasChanges method to the repository, and then we will use it to enable and disable the save button in the Friend Organizer application. Here I've opened the iFriendRepository interface. Let's add here a method that returns a bool and that we call hasChanges. Now we can implement this method in our friend repository. So I press Ctrl- here to implement the interface. I scroll down a bit, and here I have the hasChanges method. All I need to do in this method is to grab the DB change tracker that is in the change tracker property of the context. That DB change tracker has an hasChanges method, and I call that, and I just return the value of this hasChanges method. So now we have already the hasChanges method implemented in our friend repository, and we can use it to enable and disable the save button.